Tansei, hello everybody, welcome. As people are strolling in, I will just give it a couple more minutes. We've had quite a bit of registrations for this webinar, so I just want to make sure that we have enough people in before we get started. All right, let's get started. Hello, Tansei Osawe Maskwa Squayun Nisagalasan. My name is Rebecca Sinclair. I'm from Barren Lands First Nation and Little Saskatchewan First Nation. I am Indigenous Climate Action's Research and Policy Analyst and lead on the Decolonizing Climate Policy work. Thank you all for joining us today for the Decolonizing Climate Policy Webinar 2. Some housekeeping before we get into introductions. Translation to French is available. You can access the translation at the bottom of the screen. It kind of looks like a little globe. You click on that. I also wanted to share with you all that the Decolonizing Climate Policy team has developed a survey that is currently live on our webpage. In an effort to create meaningful Indigenous-led climate policy, we're inviting all people who are Indigenous to these lands to fill out the survey. This will be linked in the chat, and you can also find it on our webpage, which will also be linked in the chat. For more information on Decolonizing Climate Policy, you can reach us on our webpage at indigenousclimateaction.com. We are here today joined by a few members of our Indigenous-led Climate Policy Advisory Council, and I feel like I'm saying Indigenous-led Climate Policy way too much right now, but we are joined by a couple of our Advisory Council members today. Tiffany Travers, representing the Mountain Forest biome. Tiffany is a non-status Swinomic farmer, land and seed steward, language learner, and food sovereignty advocate. Her passion for feeding people and firm belief in the right to healthy, culturally appropriate foods for all drives her work. She is passionate about the uncomfortable work in dismantling structural racism within institutions and conducting experimental plant breeding projects to adapt nutrient-dense cultivar. I should have drank some water before I started, but anyway. To our changing climate and as a guest to Treaty 8 territory, Tiffany has served as a volunteer advisory council member with the Community Seed Network and currently sits as a member at large on the board of directors for Seed Change, as well as on the Equity and Inclusion Advisory Committee for Farmers for Climate Solutions. Her day job, Tiffany engages with stakeholders, partners, and rural residents through her work as a wildlife assistant with the BC Wildfire Service to help present education around wildfire prevention and mitigation, as well as encourage autonomy for land stewardship within Indigenous communities. Her hope is to continue being a weaver, advocate, to create better access to resources and increase our collective seed and food security and sovereignty. Pamela Beebe represents our grassland biome. Pamela is a member of Ganaya Nation, Treaty 7, and currently resides in Calgary. Her spouse, Tito, is a member of Tohono O'odham and Chippewa Cree Nations. Sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly. And they have 2 teenagers, Brody and Leanne. Pamela currently works as a systems planner at the Calgary Homeless Foundation. In her free time, she enjoys storytelling as a producer with Tito, volunteer and director, as they have created short films and continue to pursue this passion. In the 1990s, Pamela completed her first degree at McGill University and graduated as a chiropractor from Life West Chiropractic College. She switched careers when her children were born and has been primarily employed in the not-for-profit sector for the past 10 years. Pamela volunteers in a community for organizations that support women's issues, housing, environment, and diversity and equity. We have also Jessie Mike representing our Arctic biome. Jessie is an Inuk woman who is born and raised in Iqaluit, but lived in her family's hometown of Pangerton for short stints in the early years. She has 2 daughters. I'm so sorry, Jessie, I'm probably not going to pronounce your daughter's names right. Niveak, aged 9, and I'm not even going to try that one, sorry. I'll let you introduce your daughter's names because they are beautiful names and I would love to hear how they're properly pronounced. And is married to Maura Safali, who is from Nome, Alaska. Together, they raised their girls in an area of short ride from Iqaluit called Apex. Jessie has always stayed committed to advocating for Inuit on social justice issues and continues to do so where she can. She is currently the project director for a nonprofit learning organization called I Am Gonna Do Better and learn these all by the end of the year. That's my goal. And is in the end of her studies for Axe University in Public Administration and Governance with an Indigenous focus. We also have our youth representative, Brianna Brown. She is an Inuk and a Mi'kmaq from Nunatsiavut. Nope, that's not even right. Labrador. She came with the idea to promote land back, to advocate for sovereignty and Indigenous peoples, as well as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, communities, and land ownership as a means of environmental protection. She is on the Indigenous Climate Action's National Steering Committee, as well as Climate Policy Advisory Council, and the community sport worker working in anti-human trafficking for Inuits. She advocates for the rights of women, Indigenous people, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, environmental injustice in relation to MMIWG persons with disabilities, mental health, food security among Indigenous communities, human trafficking, and decolonization. Brianna is just a superstar. Brianna is also an Indigenous facilitator working with TechnoWave. Moderating today's discussion is Ariel Deranger, our Executive Director for Indigenous Climate Action. Ariel is a Decolonizing woman from Athabasca Chippewa First Nation. She is also our co-founder of Indigenous Climate Action, an Indigenous-led climate justice organization in SoCal, Canada. Deranger is a member of the International Peoples Forum on Climate Change and sits on various boards, including Pioneers, It Takes Roots, Leadership Council, Climate Justice Resilience Fund, Council of Advisors, UK Tar Sands Network, and WWF Canada, and is a founding member of the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. I think all of our panelists here today, including our moderator, are just amazing superstars in the work of Indigenous justice and Indigenous rights and activism. So I am super, super excited to lead it off to Ariel to moderate for the rest of today, and I'll be working in the background along with the other DCP and ICA team. So thank you so much. To you, Ariel.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And thank you everyone for joining us today in the second webinar in our series, Exploring Decolonizing Climate Policy. I'm not sure if, Rebecca, you introduced yourself and said where you're from. I don't know if you wanted to pop back on, because I feel like you introduced everybody, but you didn't necessarily introduce yourself. So maybe take a, one more minute, introduce yourself.
I did introduce myself. But I'm not as big of a superstar today, so I didn't give a whole bio, but you can read my bio on our Indigenous Climate Action webpage. But again, I'm Tansei Osawe Maskwaskuyun Isigadasan. My name is Rebecca Sinclair, and I'm originally from Barren Lands First Nation, which is in northern Manitoba. And I'm also a member of Little Saskatchewan First Nation, which is my husband's nation in the Interlake of Manitoba. I have been working on decolonizing climate policy for just a little under a year, and have released the phase 1 report in collaboration with ICA and Dr. Jen Gabi. So again, you can read my bio on the webpage, and there'll be an opportunity for us to speak again, because this is 2 in a part 4 series of webinars. Thanks, Ariel.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited for today's presentations where we're going to get to hear from this amazing panel of speakers where they will each be given, to start off with, 10 minutes to speak to their work, what they do, and why it's important in the context of decolonizing climate policy in so-called Canada. I also am going to apologize in advance. I have birds. They are being very loud today. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. This is a not day, I guess. And I'm really, really excited just for this program in general. This program on decolonizing climate policy is really critical. We are like less than a week out from a national federal colonial election process in which climate hasn't really been a major issue on the agenda. Yet climate affects our communities vastly in all the different possible ways that you could think of, from our food security to our cultural security, to the survival of our languages, to the survival of our governance structures, and essentially just the survival of our cultures wholly as it connects to our lands and territories. Yet Canadian governments and colonial governments the world over are creating climate policies that are developed without us and that have deep impacts on us. So to start this panel off, I would really love to open it up to the speakers, and starting with Tiffany, who can just tell us a little bit more about your work, what you do, and how and why this is so important in the discussions around climate policy.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and Ariel. Yeah, Huayco Kwaitep, Rusquest Re, Tiffany Traverse, Sequepmuke, Stlaka ta Sequepmukulu, ta Simk, Mutka na Treaty 8 territory. Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Traverse. I'm Secwepemc, living in the beautiful boreal forest in Treaty 8 territory, home of the Deneza and Beaver Peoples. And yeah, I prepared a bit of a presentation. I'm just gonna share my screen here. Yes, so I have been lucky enough to represent the mountain forest biome. From my home in Secwepemculu, I grew up right along the Setetqua, which is one of the biggest rivers, in our area. So the Columbia River, I grew up right along the Columbia River. And what I did for my presentation here is I wanted to talk very briefly about the work that I'm doing, but I actually took a different approach, and I'm going to be highlighting a few different projects that are happening back home in Secwepemculu, as well as up here actually in the northeast portion of so-called BC. So I'm just going to share a couple photos here. Here we have me with some Labrador tea and also tending the land just out in the back 40 here of our property. So I do a lot of work around native plant species as well as cultivated species. I do work with Indigenous seed stewards all over the world. And actually part of the work that I'm doing here on our farm is stewarding seeds and seed ancestors for people that may not have access to land or may not have access to their cultural foods. So because I have the privilege of access to land, I'm able to grow quite a few different seeds out here, and in a very challenging climate. We do have about a 90-day growing season, give or take. So here's me out in the gardens. And yeah, basically what I want to do is I want to jump right into what I believe is going to be a huge solution for biodiversity loss and ecosystem destruction, which is happening largely in part due to greed and also what's happening with the climate chaos. So I'm going to be focusing primarily on guardianship programs, which, as you can see on the slide here, the federal government has announced another $340 million toward the guardianship programs, which is going to protect species at risks and also conserve ecosystems in each of our Indigenous communities. So it's a bit of money, it's a start. I know that there was money in the last couple of years that they were putting towards this program, and it's really amazing to see that they are seeing the importance of these guardian programs and putting more money into them. And yeah, I just want to go through, like, when we're talking about stewardship, you know, you have a lot of people, primarily settlers, who think of the idea of stewardship and land back as taking away land from people and giving it back to Indigenous communities. And while that is amazing, and I would love to see land being given back to Indigenous peoples, really what stewardship means is not ownership. Stewardship means the caring for the landscape, the plants, the animals, and everything that happens within the ecosystems. We've had a huge amount of disconnect from land, place, and culture, also our traditions, and that is creating quite the imbalance in what is happening in all of our ecosystems across the whole world. And one little section in there about dissolving this notion of you know, that we're the only ones here. Really, it should be eco over ego. We are part of this system. We are not at the top. And in my intro, when I say Stlaka ta, that means where I'm from. And so I figured it would be fitting to open up where I'm from and just highlight a few of the projects that are happening back home in Secwepemcúlecw. So my band, the Shuswap Indian Band, they're working really hard on some new governance structures, as well as revitalization of their culture and language, which is a huge part of what I'm really passionate about, is to really be speaking the names of the plants and animals and of the land, and really, you know, having that be a part of our lives is the language back, as well as they have a complete territorial stewardship office. And if you go on their website, you can see all of the different programming that they have over their very detailed community plans, which is anything, like I said, from revitalization of culture and languages to protecting keystone species within our landscape. And I also wanted to touch here on the working group on Indigenous food sovereignty. This is the group that Don Morrison heads up. And they have a whole bunch that's going on right now. And I just wanted to highlight a few of these items that they're working on. I'm going to probably butcher the name, but it's Chwelcht, and that is the We Are Well. I actually got the privilege of visiting the gardens out near the Nisconlith Indian Band. And this is basically a holistic approach to land-based health and wellness that they're working on out there. It's absolutely beautiful. And they're actually working on activating some more solidarity economies across the whole of Secwepemcúlecw and beyond. And then also conserving and restoring Indigenous foodlands, which is really in place to protect keystone species that are being disconnected and separated from the landscape due to, mainly due to agriculture in that particular area, but also due to industry. And then I can't forget about my Tunaha cousins. I have a lot of family who are Tunaha, and I just wanted to highlight, this is one of the main projects that I thought was amazing. So similarly to here, what I've been seeing on the landscape, we had the heat domes that happened here up in the north, getting temperatures that we never see, not even in August, which is the hottest month. And the Tunaha actually put in place huckleberry harvest restrictions, a moratorium basically on huckleberry harvesting by commercial harvesters to protect the grizzly populations. And then where I'm living now, up in Treaty 8 territory, I wanted to just highlight a few projects that are happening up here. And this project here, the Caribou Guardianship Program, has been running for a few years now. And this is run in partnership with the Soto and West Morley First Nations, who work on trying to revitalize the caribou population, the Klinziza caribou population up in the mountains here, which involves maternity, penning, harvest and feeding of native species of lichens, and then monitoring and data collection on how the herds are doing. And another area up here, and I had the privilege of watching this lovely documentary the other day about the Musqueam Management Area. And this, you can see on the map of the province of so-called British Columbia, that highlighted area in yellow is the entire protected area for the Musqueam. Within that, actually, there's partnerships in protection of the pristine landscapes, but also working with industry. So the Cascadena and Treaty 8 territory peoples have been working in partnership with different industry professionals on how they can maintain these pristine landscapes. And I just chose one quick picture to show the beautiful mountainous landscape, but I highly recommend checking out those two web pages to see beautiful videos of, like, it's unheard of the amount of protected area there is. The 8 million hectares of protected area up in that area. It's roughly the size of Ireland, just to give you some context. And then just jumping a little bit into the 2021 wildfire season, I do work for BC Wildfire Service, so I'm not going to focus on what exactly we're doing. I wanted to focus on what's happening out in community, and I just wanted to give a shout out to the indispensable fire crew. This is an amazing family-run fire crew that they just started up this year when fires were burning around their home communities near Spence's Bridge, and they chose to stay and defend, which means they did not evacuate when there were evacuation orders, and they chose to stay behind and defend their community. They received assistance from FINESS, which is a First Nations Emergency Social Services, for training equipment, who brought out pumps and hose and showed them how to basically set up hose lays around their communities to protect it. And they're actually working towards setting up an even, like a more trained crew. Actually, we have different levels of crews, so they're going to set up a crew for next year so that they can be working close to home. And I really love this idea of community-led or Indigenous-led fire crews, because they know the landscape. And I've got a point in here too. So what's going to happen now after the BC wildfires that came through this province, as far as recovery and rehabilitation? And I'm a firm believer that this work should be done and led by the Indigenous communities where these are happening, because they are disproportionately impacting each of these communities. And I believe they should have a say in, you know, how the rehabilitation process goes. You know, if they're looking at planting native species, well, let's look at planting native species that are actually foods for the animals and the people. And also, I think this would be a great linkage into the guardianship program, which would, you know, have them out on the land, monitoring and seeing what's happening, perhaps bringing back in cultural burning, which is also something that I would love to see, to bring, you know, good fire back onto the landscape. And that's that. I kind of flew through that one. I'm going to leave you here with a quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer, Breeding Sweetgrass. "Even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy. I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return that gift." And I really feel that that just encompasses what I love about the Guardian programs. Is this is Indigenous-led, place-based communities protecting and preserving their communities. And that's what I've got for my presentation. Thank you, everyone. Kuksja.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. If you want to end your screen share, that would be lovely. Thank you so much. It's so amazing to see the amazing work that is being done in our communities. And I think that is the point of the work that ICA is undertaking, is that we aren't just drawing on new innovations that we are creating now. We are drawing on our ancestral knowledge that has been affirmed and utilized for thousands and thousands of years to protect and safeguard the planet's most critical and needed biodiversity. With the, sorry, my birds, they were so quiet when I was not talking. It's really funny. But what we've seen is, like, with the Guardian Initiative, it's such a wonderful and amazing initiative to see investments in the Guardian programs. But what we need more than just Guardians and this investment in this is empowering our communities to be leaders, not just giving us the funding to enact things in our you know, colonially defined traditional territories, but for us to go forward and assert what's necessary at a broader perspective. This requires the unpacking and the decolonization of the current structures that we are immersed in currently. I actually had a conversation just yesterday with my daughter, who's writing a paper for one of her classes on Indigenous education, and she had to create a metaphor for the Indigenous Canadian relations. And I said, it's like being a grown-ass human being invited to a dinner party last minute that's being hosted at your own house and being relegated to the kiddie table and being served mashed potatoes while everyone else is eating filet mignon. And I was just like, that is perfect. That is perfect. And so while we are being invited into the conversation, we are still relegated to small things. While $340 million seems like a lot, there are about 700 plus Indigenous communities in this country. 750 relatively, if you look at the First Nations, the Inuit settlements, and the Métis settlements, it is a vast majority of communities, and that $340 million doesn't even equal $1 million for each community to do this work. And we need more than that. We need more resources, and more than that, we need the belief that this work is valuable to bringing and advancing climate solutions. With that, I would love to hear more about what you are doing, Jessie, and the amazing work in your communities, and how you see this as valuable to contributing to Indigenous-led climate solutions.
Okay, thank you. I just have pictures to share just to kind of give you guys a visual while I'm talking. Here, share screen. And a lot of these pictures are not actually mine. Some of them you'll understand why. And just to support some of what Rebecca was saying, my name's Jessie Mike. I live in Apex. This is a picture of Apex that I found that I didn't take, but looked cool with the ice in the background. It's a very small outskirt of Iqaluit. And my two girls are Miknaya and Nivea. And they are, even before them, but with children in mind and the future generations in mind, I've always tried to work towards making sure that we leave, and as our ancestors did, leave a livable earth for them. And as Rebecca said in my bio, I try to do more work in social justice and not directly climate change work, but it's holistic. And I think everything that we do impacts our lives in a very holistic way. Next one here, and this is Iqaluit. This is part of Iqaluit where I live, where I was raised here. Where I live now, you can't see in this picture. Iqaluit is the capital of Nunavut. It's very different from all 24 other communities in the territory. We're very large, and we are not necessarily a large majority Inuit, but we are still quite like a prominent population of the town. We have a high transient population of settlers. And then these are my girls. My major inspirations to, and also a reason why I fear more than ever climate change that's happening. This picture is of me in Banuktu, which is where my mother is originally from, as Rebecca had mentioned. It's a very beautiful community an hour north, a much smaller community. And yeah, so like I said, a lot of the work that and the advocacy that I do is so that my children and all of the people that are coming after us have the ability to live an Inuk life on the land, in their language, with the traditional skills that we have. And that's what I do in my full-time job at Ilitaksinik, where we're decolonizing education. And we provide learning opportunities for mostly Inuit in Nunavut to learn and regain or enhance traditional skills and our language as well, because those skills are what we need to survive. When, you know, prior to colonization, 4,000 years or more, we've been here because of those skills, and eventually we're going to, I think, need those skills to continue to survive. successfully and thriving. Yeah. One of the main things that when people, especially non-Indigenous people, when they want to talk about climate change, the best way for them to get attention tends to be to talk about this animal right here. Really healthy animal. This picture was taken last week up in Arctic Bay, one by Claire Kynes and the other one by Neely Kalutjuk. That's a really humongous, healthy bear. And one of the things that as Inuit and as Indigenous people, I think the sad part is when you actually just talk about people, it's not important enough that you have to talk about an animal that is considered cute and endangered, which are both false. They're extremely dangerous and they adapt better than any of us could possibly adapt to surviving. And there are high abundance of them to the point where they're becoming very much a problem in many of the communities because of I think a lot of it has to do with the quotas that communities have, that, not being able to harvest them to make sure to kind of control that population, but also to provide food and warmth for our communities. And yeah, so I mean, you a lot of the things that we've seen over the years as people, the polar bear, and what we've been trying to say is that there's us people who are at more risk than they are, and that's what our elders have been saying for a really long time, that they're extremely brilliant and they're survivors and they will be fine and adapt to the world. And the reason why I think what Inuit and our elders have been fighting for is that for us to have access to our food. And our food is obviously why we're here today. Our food is still something that we rely on it's a daily part of most of our diets. And it's extremely nutritious and it's for the most part affordable, and we take care of it as well. And so our hopes are that our children will have a chance to continue to eat these foods safely, and without fear of them disappearing, migrating too far, and being harmed by mining and ship activities in the north. These foods are like I said, every day, I've eaten one of each of these 4 in the last week. They're very much a part of our diet. And one of the things that, in my contribution, I think, to this group has been to look back to see there's already been so much work done, but that hasn't been properly listened to for a very long time. And my grandfather was one of them, and I always, we listen to them, but what we realize is that the policies that are put in place are not listening to the people that were our knowledge holders. And I think that, what we're seeing this year, a lot of hunters and people are starting to talk about, especially in the north where there's a mine, is that there's a lot less whales and seals and fish. There's not, it's very noticeable, I should say, for them. And they've been talking about it all summer, and that's very unfortunate, for obvious reasons, I think. And so and I wanted to share this picture. These are the land defenders that you might have heard of in the news. They interrupted in protest the airstrip. They blocked off the airstrip at the Mary River mine because in protest of a second phase of the mine expansion, and that expansion was expected to have even further harm on our waters, on our land, on our wildlife migration, and all of these things. And these guys are hunters, and hunters are the stewards, they're the protectors of land and animals. And these people were, they trekked 160 kilometers on snow machines in -50 weather to protest, in protest. And among, there was a lot of support and protest within the communities as well, and from elders. And so that second phase is not moving forward. And I hope that it won't be too late and that the animals will start to feel safer again to travel through those routes that are interrupting their life. I think that's mostly, I think, what I wanted to share. We're very much, as Inuit, we are not necessarily impacted the same as Southern Canada is. And I feel like if we don't stop things now and take control, it's only going to get worse. And I really just hope that when people develop policies, that they start to listen to the people that are impacted, first of all, and have been here for thousands of years, because it all comes from a place of taking care of the earth. And I really like that quote that Tiffany, you ended with. As terrifying as things have been, especially this summer, I try to have moments of feeling just grateful for what we have here. And it's berry picking season right now, and we didn't have a lot this year, but we're still able to. The earth is still producing food for us, and I think we just need to take care of it. I don't know if before is too late is even if that's even legit, because I feel like it's become pretty too late lately. Not so. Anyways, I'm going to end it there. And thank you for the opportunity again. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Jessie. I think Jessie's presentation really underscores the importance of the deep relationships our communities have with our food systems. And that is encompassing the deep relationships we have with our lands in general. And I guess I didn't really give a full description of like the speakers and how ICA chose our representatives that are a part of our advisory council. We decided to go through biomes. So each speaker represents a different biome. So Tiffany is representing the mountain forest biomes. Jessie is representing the Arctic tundra biome. And Pamela, our next speaker, is representing the grasslands biome. We unfortunately were not able to get Deborah McGregor today, but she represents the temperate deciduous forest biomes. And then we are so lucky and fortunate to have Brianna, who's our youth representative, but we also have another biome, which is the boreal forest biome, and Catherine was not able. So we're going to be going through the different biomes and breaking it up. Otherwise, we'd have too many speakers for each presentation. But we're really exploring the biomes as opposed to the colonial borders of provinces and territories and regions, or the defined territories that the government have divided us in between as far as treaty territories and so on and so forth. So we really wanted to challenge these perspectives. And with that, I'd love to pass it off to our next speaker, Pamela, to talk about the grassland biome.
Okay, everyone, Nidonik go Inukapura. I'm Pamela from Gainawa here in Treaty 7. I'm in Mokinsees, which is home to Siksika Sitapi, the Gainai, Pikani, and Siksika, the Tsuut'ina, and the Ayahe Nakota nations. That's Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Wesley. And then this area is also home to the Métis people of Region 3. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So Gainai is located in southern Alberta. This whole territory is Blackfoot territory. And my grandparents I grew up hearing from them talk about the importance of the treaty. That's very relevant today because we're actually voting virtually and we'll be voting in person tomorrow. And it's to our tribe sued the Canadian government to ask them to please honor the treaty related to the specifically agriculture, the cows. We also had one for the land, the amount of land that was given to Gainai. The Blood tribe is the largest tribe in land-wise in Canada. I think my slides are a little out of order, but that's okay. Well, this is Tsuut'ina Nation, which is right next to Mokinsees, where I live. And this is one of our film projects that we filmed out on the land related to healing. Currently, we are still recovering from the opioid crisis and the pandemic. And so we had created a short film to talk about the importance and the connection to jingle dress and the traditional dances that are relevant here. My husband is a grass dancer and we raised our children to be grass dancer, our son, and then my daughter to be a jingle dress dancer. I wanted to touch a little bit about what Gainai is doing. We have Kipa, and you can read all about it on our bloodtribe.org website. So Kipa is the organization on the reserve that protects the land. Their current project is collecting the seeds and keeping an inventory of those for us. Right now, a lot of our youth are able to go out and collect, as mentioned previously today, that we can collect sage right now, although we traditionally use sweetgrass for smudging. And that's one of the 4 main medicines that we use when we smudge, but Blackfoot people use that. Thank you for going through the slides. That's wonderful. I love them. Okay, so we'll go back to the beginning. I just want to finish the thought about Kipa. And then another grassroots organization down here is the Niitsitapi Water Protectors. Niitsitapi refers to Blackfoot people, the real people, and they are currently trying to get all the coal mining stopped. What happened is our current government allowed more mining to happen, and it's a little bit of a conflict because specifically the tribe next to it, they Pikani, the chief and council decided to support the project, which created quite a stir in the community. And they were looking at the jobs. Obviously, poverty rates down here are very high and unemployment is high currently. But the grassroots efforts like Niitsitapi Water Protectors were able to successfully get that stopped, one of the projects stopped. Because it's very important that we protect the water down here, the Old Man River. This picture here is when we were walking here in Mokinsees, and we always look up to the sky. In fact, I like to tell people that when we pray, when our elders pray, they always start with Ayastabadabi, which is referring to the way we live. And then Ionatdusi. So then we start praying to our ancestors in the skies. And so it's important daily to look up. And I always feel that I am protected and guarded and watched over when I look up and see eagles or I see hawks, that they're sending messages to me through that connection. And then I want to mention, this is me in Sikokatoki, which is Lethbridge, walking along the coulees. And that's a good connection because we were severely impacted this summer by the fires around us. We didn't have too many in our area, but around us, the smoke affected us. And also it was an extremely dry summer. So today it was raining, which is super exciting because we needed it really badly. And the way that impacts us is, the way I look at it from my perspective is the agriculture is a system. And so they're well protected, right, by policies from the government. However, as people living here, we're going to be impacted by higher prices when we have to shop for food. And we're already impacted by food insecurity. And so it is a concern because of this severely dry season. In fact, we had our elders from Gainai asking us to pray because of the water. There's so much water shortage this summer, and the water reserves were so low. And so when we did our opening prayers at events, we would actually mention the low water. And I know it gets hard to hear all the time about boil water advisories, but we had one on our nation in August. And it directly impacts our families. So I have a lot of family that lives in Gainai, and my family was impacted severely by this. And so when we go to vote, I mentioned the voting we're doing on our nation specifically, and it's just a small vote in relative terms because it's only specifically for this settlement, and it's not very much funding, it's a few dollars. But we're going to vote federally and next week, and then we're going to go vote municipal next month. And it's really hard to see ourselves in that because the candidates are usually not Indigenous, and they're definitely not Blackfoot women connected to the nation like this. And so it's very hard for me to get behind that. And so the way I look at it is I consider myself grassroots. All of the work that I do, all of the jobs that I have held, I am trying to improve the quality of life for people living here in Treaty 7 Nation and how we're connected to the people across the nation and across North America. I told you my family, well, I might not have told you because we flew over that slide. Sorry about that. We'll go back to my family. Good. So this is us. My husband's Oto Odom and Chippewa Cree. So we're hoping at the end of this year to go down and visit his family. We haven't been down to Oto Odom since Brody there on the right, my son who just turned 18, since he was in elementary school. And my daughter can't remember it. That's Leanne there, she's in grade 10. And we haven't been to Chippewa Cree, Montana since it's been a few years. We were planning to go 2 years ago, but then all of this happened in the world. So we're hoping to go in a couple of months to go visit everybody, and we're super excited for that. My kids have been trying to learn Cree. Their grandparents gave them the app for Cree. I've been trying to learn Blackfoot my whole life, so I understand quite a bit of it, but I don't necessarily speak it. Siksikaitsitabi refers to the Blackfoot Confederacy, and we have a lot of Blackfoot speakers still, and we have a lot of our youth trying to learn the language. And on the nation, they are able to have a class in Blackfoot. And then we have Tsuut'ina language, which is the Dene language. We have Aihe Nakota language around here. And so we have several languages that you will not be able to hear anywhere else in this world unless you come and visit us here in Treaty 7, which I hope all of you get the opportunity to. I want to mention that we do still have food insecurity here. The reason I chose the Homeless Foundation to work at is because in Lethbridge and Sikokatoki, they have 70% of the population are homeless, and most of them are Indigenous, and most of them are from Gainai, my reserve. Here in Mohkinstsis, the number is 40% of the people who are homeless are Indigenous. And again, I see names that I'm very familiar with, the family names, you know, we know each other. And So I do this work to try to address that directly. I do it professionally. I do the climate action policy work in the evenings and weekends. And I work very hard so that people know what is happening, as I mentioned, locally and nationally, because it's very important. It's all related. There's lots you can learn. The buffalo is very important to us. So we have the Buffalo Treaty with Elder Leroy Little Bear. He's my uncle. I encourage you to look that up. And we're currently working on a film with Telespark Science Center, a short film, another short film, because I do those for fun. And it's referring to the skies. It's telling more of those stories related to like Seven Brothers and Wolf Trail. So watch out for those. And thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for the wonderful pictures and stories and the journey. And I really just loved your point on how, participating in colonial election processes is often hard because we don't see ourselves in those systems. And that is a part of the work that we're doing here. And I think it's a nice rounding wrap up for the presentations part. And then we'll get into the Q&A and discussion part is Brianna, who is bringing forward the youth perspectives, because this is what we're working and fighting for is future generations. And Brianna represents a voice of the next generation that are coming into positions of leadership. And it's so important that we not only include them, but we empower them to be in these spaces with us. So with that, I'd like to hand it off to you, Brianna.
Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who has spoken so far. I really, really appreciate all of your work. So I just wanted to say to Lee, hi, Brianna Bunga. Hello, my name is Brianna. I would like to start off by acknowledging the land, and I would like to acknowledge that I am on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory, also known as Ottawa. And I respect that land back. I'm also Inuk and Mi'kmaq from Nunavut, Labrador. I'm on the Indigenous Climate Action National Steering Committee, and I'm also on the Climate Policy Advisory Council. And I'm a land and water protector, of course. I also work in anti-human trafficking and efforts to prevent violence towards Indigenous peoples, as I believe that the exploitation of Indigenous peoples is closely and heavily related to the exploitation of the land. I am also currently working with TechnoWave Inc. as an Indigenous facilitator for the Indigenous Foundation's training program. As in my experience, education has taught me that lifelong learning has ameliorated many aspects of my life due to the fact that I was given the opportunity to learn in an environment with a harm reduction centered approach to education for Indigenous peoples. Focusing on cultural revitalization, the resilience of Indigenous peoples, and having a trauma-informed approach is of high value and importance to me in the work that I do. So thank you so much for having me here today. And I just wanted to say that I really enjoy working with the researchers, Rebecca Sinclair and Dr. Jen Gabi, as well as the other members of the Climate Policy Advisory Council. And I'm learning a lot given this opportunity. Something that really stood out to me in a previous meeting with the Advisory Council was a quote from, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, but I'll try. Anjise Aki, International Climate Calls to Action. So I apologize again if that's not pronounced right. But the quote was that transformation of our global society will be possible if the leadership of Indigenous peoples is respected. And I'm noticing that in this work, this is truly being upheld. And that is the reason that I'm able to feel confident in being a part of this work. And it makes me want to show up as well, which is very important to me as an advocate for the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, because a lot of the reason that that is an issue at all is that Indigenous women are very isolated in society due to a large variety of factors. Another thing that is important to me is that I've realized that the reason that decolonization of climate policy is very important to understand is that in many ways, organizations and individuals will market themselves as decolonial in one way or another without fully understanding actionable ways that they can truly decolonize. And I think that is often misunderstood or purposely ignored. And this ignorance is another hidden form of colonization under the guise that it is marketed as decolonial, which can also be harmful if you are not informed. And to be truly informed of Indigenous knowledge, you must gain that knowledge from Indigenous people. But we also must take this a step further. And so for that reason, I would like to read you another quote by Technowave Inc., as I believe that they're also doing very well in terms of decolonizing the work that they do. And I would also like to thank them for allowing me to be here right now, because I am also working at Technowave right now. So I appreciate them allowing me to be here. So the quote is, "Being an ally to Indigenous peoples." And it says, "We would like for you to take some time today to reflect on how you can support Indigenous peoples and Indigenous businesses, artists, professionals, and frontline advocates as an ally. Learning about the intergenerational trauma Indigenous peoples face as a result of residential schools, ongoing colonial violence, and the impact of Indigenous peoples is the first step. However, we must take this further by ensuring that we listen to and retrieve this information from Indigenous peoples, as this encourages and empowers Indigenous peoples' existence and self-sovereignty. Secondly, while learning from Indigenous peoples, we must also value their time and knowledge, compensating them adequately for their work while contributing to their movement and livelihoods. And lastly, we must consider, how do we create spaces around us that make Indigenous peoples feel safer? How do we contribute to the well-being of Indigenous peoples daily? And because the environment is so closely connected to Indigenous culture, we must also question, how do we protect the land to sustain well-being for not only Indigenous peoples, but all of our relations? And protecting and sustaining the well-being of all of our relations is crucial to fostering harm reduction in our environments. So that is a quote I had gotten from Technowave Inc. as well. And I also believe that this is being represented in the work of Indigenous climate action. And something I've realized throughout my relationship with Indigenous climate action is that they have helped me to heal by amplifying my voice, as well as breaking barriers in many areas in my life. I had started Land Back in September 2019, and I had no idea that it would become a large movement. And at the time, I was very ill from being hit by a vehicle. So it was just hard for me to be very vocal about advocating. And I was really happy to be connected with Indigenous climate action. And after the Land Back movement had started, I was very, very surprised to see on the Indigenous climate action website that they were in a climate change conference in Madrid, Spain, and there was a large banner saying Land Back that they were holding. And this was when I had realized that Land Back had caught on, and I wasn't the only person that just wrote it on a piece of paper at a protest. And then that in reflection, after seeing that in Madrid, Spain, I realized that my great-great-grandmother had been taken to Madrid, Spain from Labrador to be featured in a human zoo. So that's something that I was also learning about and exploring. And this had caused me to also think deeper about how missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and human trafficking is so closely related with climate change. And since having Indigenous climate action believe in me and amplify my voice, I found that there's been so much healing. And then I really also like what Tiffany had said earlier about being stewards to the land, and that we are not meant to be really owners of the land. And that's not really a traditional way of being with the land for a lot of Indigenous peoples. So when I had came up with land back, for me, it wasn't something I was trying to claim. I'm only really speaking about it more so lately that that's something that I had started. And the reason I haven't ever really wanted to do that was because just like the land is not to be owned, this movement is not to be owned just by one person. And it is a collective community effort. And that's, I believe, how it became something that is now a global movement. And because when I had first started that, I was really, really ill due to being hit by a car, and then not being able to access healthcare due to systemic racism. I began to just lose my voice and feel weaker. And I ended up moving to Ontario to try to receive healthcare. But I ended up in a shelter because I was so weak, and I would pass out often. And I was starting to lose a lot of confidence and feeling really low about myself. So I remember when there was the Wet'suwet'en protest in 2020 in February here in Ottawa. And I finally was feeling better after a surgery and coming out of the shelter, just starting to integrate myself with society again. And going to that protest, when I seen people speak about land back, that was another time when I realized that it was still something that people were talking about or becoming a large movement. And I was so shocked because people didn't know that that was something that I started. But it also like just revived my spirit so much. It was really, really beautiful. I'm getting emotional. So thank you. I appreciate you so much. And thank you also for allowing me to speak on Indigenous climate actions on behalf for various organizations, as I've found my voice more and more through traditional storytelling, which is also bringing me closer to culture and reducing a lot of harm towards myself, allowing me to share a lot of my thoughts with other people and pushing this movement forward. So thank you so, so much.
Thank you so much, Brianna. I think that it's super important for us to consider the ways that we have impacts in our communities and how this has ripple effects to the new generations. I also want to read a quote before we get into the Q&A part, but it's from an old book. It's called, oh my God, I have that thing, Columbus and Other Cannibals by Jack Forbes. It's like one of my favorite, but it says, love of Mother Earth was not simply an abstraction for many Native Americans. Luther Standing Bear tells us how the Lakota people love the earth. The old people came literally to love the soil, and they sat or reclined on the ground with a feeling of being close to a mothering power. It was good for the skin to touch the earth, and the old people liked to remove their moccasins and walk with bare feet on the sacred earth. The soil was soothing, strengthening, cleansing, and healing. Wherever the Lakota went, he was with Mother Earth. No matter where they roamed by day or slept by night, they were safe with her. Thus, it is that the process of learning from Mother Earth, the animals, and nature cannot be cold and scientific only, but must include love, the magic stuff of the universe. And I really think that that speaks to even what Brianne is talking about, because we cannot move forward in talking about climate and climate solutions simply from a scientific place. We must come from a place of love. And with that, I would love to open up some questions to the panelists. And this is just go around, however you want to answer this. But what is top of mind at the top of your mind for climate issues in your biomes? If you're like, this is the biggest issue for me in my biome, and what do you feel should be at the top of mind for policymakers? If you had the opportunity to be like, this is my issue in my region, this is what you should be doing as policymakers. What would you like to say? And I'm going to just open it up to you however you want. Oh, I just realized I skipped a part of the agenda. That's Rebecca was on there. So I'm going to go back. Sorry, I see it now. Sorry, I skipped an agenda. Rebecca's going to do a little interlude and do a DCP announcement right now. Decolonizing policy announcement.
Thank you, Ariel. I was going to do it after the next question, but that's okay. So I want to just share my screen here and let everybody know in attendance that we are doing a survey that's geared towards Indigenous folks that want to share their Indigenous-led solutions or thoughts or things going on within their community. You can find this survey linked in the chat. I want to reiterate that this is open to Indigenous folks, First Nation, Métis, Inuit, or those that identify as that, to share their knowledge with us so that we can make a more informed Indigenous-led climate policy framework with our advisory council. So thank you, and then I'll let you guys get into it.
I think I'm just going to open it up to whoever wants to answer that question. So top of mind climate issues in your biomes and what you feel should be at the top of minds for the policymakers.
Ariel, I'll go first, but I feel like I might have already answered it because I mentioned so much about the water quality. And then we had the drought this year, and then the boil water advisory impacting my family, because I have a lot of family who's not healthy, and so we had loss this year, and I think it's directly related. And so I would love policy advisors to have to use the water from my reserve. I would love for them to have to use it for everything. And then maybe there will be more urgency and more understanding when they're starting to agree to corporations doing more mining or whatever they're doing to our rivers here. So I guess I don't have a solution because I already touched on all of this politics. But I just want you to know that it is impacting us, and it's impacting my family in the States, the family in California and Arizona, right? Like there's droughts that are happening and it's urgent. Like we don't get a second chance at this. And I wanted to move to the States again because my husband's families are all there, but I don't want to anymore because of what I am seeing. I still love it down there, love it, but I'm worried. I'm concerned about my children. And then if I ever get grandchildren, I'm concerned. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think that's so important. Sometimes it's not just about like telling what kind of policy we need, but what are the things that are going to influence policymakers? Because even that quote I said, it's about taking off your moccasins and putting your feet in the soil. So yeah, anyone else want to answer that question? Top of mind for the issues and what you feel policymakers should be doing.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Thanks, Ariel. And thank you so much, Pam. I have to agree. I think water is probably at the top of my list for things that we should be focusing on. You know, I don't necessarily have the answer, but living in a place where industry is, you know, stealing water. I'm not going to say just necessarily taking it. They're stealing it to use for fracking. As well as back in Secwepemcúlecw, you know, you have large-scale agricultural operations that are taking water from our watersheds and our large rivers, and as well as dams and the different mega projects and mega dams that are happening. So I think that water is the main concern for me. I find it I find it quite disgusting that water is being reserved for these mega corporations, whether it's agriculture or industry, and there's still Indigenous communities who don't have clean drinking water. Like, to me, that just, I can't understand it. I guess it's just in my mind, I can't comprehend what's happening there. And I, you know, maybe I don't have a solution, but I'm hearing stories of different rivers being granted personhood. I mean, you know, if we're going to be protecting people, maybe we need to be protecting water the same way that we protect people in communities. You know, maybe that's a solution. I'd like to hear what someone else thinks about that.
Jesse or Brianna? I mean, I think that's a great question, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I mentioned in when I spoke earlier, but I think, like, if protecting our wildlife and their habitats become the first priority, that trickles down to a lot of other things maybe not happening, including resource extraction and disrupting migration routes. So I think starting from there, it would be a good starting point and impact all of the other areas of, because, like, just like water, without that food, we can't live. And so I think not protecting them from us hunting them, but protecting them from those disruptions.
Really good point. Thanks. Thanks, Jesse. Brianna, do you have anything you'd like to add to this conversation?
I guess what I was thinking that's at the top of my mind for climate issues is more so to do with looking within. And I've noticed that solutions for climate change from Indigenous women and peoples are often not looked into or respected and valued in society at large, because our traditional cultural knowledge and knowledge of the land is purposely systemically excluded for the purpose of the success of our government's capitalism and consumerism. And this also ties into the displacement of Indigenous peoples due to extractive natural resource projects, and that fueling the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, because we are displaced due to the fact that our values is more based in protecting the land that we want, I guess others want access to be able to provide for the excessive consumerism of our society. And I think it's something of a more internal struggle, because this consumerism is just marketed to us everywhere that we go. And individualism is highly valued within this type of society. And for that reason, when marketing to you to be able to sell you things, people want you to believe that you're not enough and that you absolutely need their product. And I speak about it, I guess, from this standpoint, because I've been in university for business. So that's where my viewpoint comes from, is that we're in a very individualistic society. So everyone has their own apartment, their own car, their own phone, which also isolates and distracts us from looking within and realizing that we are the creators of our realities. And I think being subjected to a reality that is dictated by a government whose values are based in consumerism, I think it's important that we choose a different, more sustainable, decolonial reality. And that starts with our own personal environment within ourselves and our own consciousness. So I think that that's something that really should be also tapped into. Thank you.
Thank you. I think like that is, I think like each one of the speakers actually just talked about like the base of this is that our community's lived realities are not being included in current policy development. That's why take off your moccasins and put your feet in the soil or drink our water or experience our lives in order to develop policy is there. But the second part of that is that they don't see how extractivism and the exploitation of our territories for consumerism, whether that's energy or products, contributes to the degradation of our land's ecosystems and our culture. Whether that's the water in Pamela's community or the food sources in the Arctic, or the ways in which our communities are able to access our lands and territories and assert our governance that Tiffany talked about, or the invisibility that Brianna talked about. The reality is our communities continue to be invisibilized within the discourse or the discussions for climate action, climate solutions, and even more importantly, climate policy, because these policies get to be like what they fall back on when they exclude us, because they say, oh, well, we have this policy. So there's some really, really good questions popping up in the Q&A. And there's one of the big questions that I'd love to hear a little bit more about. I just got to find it because there's so many. When it comes to those in higher education looking to address climate and environmental injustice through community organizing, how would you like the voices of Indigenous communities to be heard in such research? Or do you have any particular recommendations for routes of research? I'd love to pass this question on to Jessie, who's been in, like, I know the Arctic is one of the most heavily researched territories in the country, particularly when it comes to climate action. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And I'll put this in the chat box so you can see it as well. But there, I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Jessie. And I'm gonna pick some questions for all of you.
Okay. First of all, the term higher education bothers me because I'm assuming it refers to academia and not Indigenous knowledge, which to me is higher education, higher knowledge. I think on this, asking like, what would you like how would you like these voices to be heard? Or I think one of the biggest things that I've been talking about for so long is that people have been talking about it for a long time, and elders here have been talking about what's happening, what they're observing. They know the causes of it, but it's not the answers that the policymakers want to hear. So I think that it's not that there's new information that is needed necessarily. I think there's been all of that research there. You can find all of it in academia and through documentaries that have been made and oral history recordings that exist. It's all been there. It's not necessarily new information. I think it's just people don't want to take that information and act on it because it does impact it impacts capitalism in a way that doesn't benefit those people in the powerful positions. So I think continuing to ask us questions is really exhausting, and it puts the onus on us, asking us to explain things regularly or telling us, and I grew up around it. My mom was considered a knowledge holder, where we constantly had students, anthropologists, all kinds of people coming to help with their education. And I think it's all there, it's all been said. I think it's just a matter of believing it. You know, we stop questioning what we say, because what we have been saying and what my grandparents have been saying is it's better than a PhD. It's knowledge from the time they were born to the time that they answered that question, which is, you know, sometimes it was between 60 to 85 years at the time that they were being asked. So listen to them and take that answer as it is, not trying to interpret it so that it makes sense to your mind, because we're so different culturally that it's not going to make sense, and we can't explain it in a way for you to understand if you're trying to understand it in your own culture. So, and I'm not talking about Indigenous academics, obviously. I'm just, or policymakers. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. I don't want to take up too much of that time.
No, I think that's a perfect answer. I think the reality is that there's been this devaluation of Indigenous knowledge as not as anecdotal and not at the same level as Western academia. And your answer was right on par. The next question I have is I'd love for Brianna to answer this question. So when we're talking about solidarity, this comes from Valerie. She says, how do we build solidarity and support around land and water-based livelihoods and economies to counter welfare blackmail? So accept extractivism and exploitation to get bulldozed, literally, if necessary. So like, how do we get out of this blackmail culture or like economic hostage culture? And how do we build communities and solidarity for these types of communities?
That's a really good question. I think this is all I can really think of at the moment. Is that these relationships must be reciprocal, but we need to allow Indigenous people to tell you how they can be respected while providing this knowledge and this work, and also to adequately be compensated and for that work, and choosing to have value in what is being said. And I think that's often overlooked, because in academia, there has been a history of being excluded, as white males were predominantly those who were only allowed to attend school, and therefore being able to, I guess, become in positions of power. And I think that when we realize that much academia has been founded from the viewpoint of those who have historically been given the privilege and access to dictate what knowledge is right or wrong, and to dictate what is valued academically, implying that their viewpoint is supreme to all others. I think we need to keep that in the forefront of our mind when working together, because when you understand that, you're able to understand that we must have to open our minds up to new viewpoints to make any changes. And to make those changes effective. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's the idea is that we need to be empowered with control and authority over our own communities and territories and lands and resources, which will end this exploitation and move us forward. I just want to say, I apologize, but our translator has to leave in 3 minutes. I would like to continue this conversation and ask Pamela and Tiffany some questions, but we will lose translation at 1 o'clock, right on the dot, or the top of the hour, whichever hour your time zone you are in. So I do apologize, but I don't want to end the conversation just quite yet. I would love to send this question to both Pamela and Tiffany. After COVID, governments have been talking about building back better. We can do the same with climate change, especially using an Indigenous perspective. There's a term, anti-fragility, that describes that theory. How can we best promote this idea among governments? So how can we build back better, like we talked about that with COVID, but apply it to climate change and Indigenous perspectives? How can we best promote this idea among our governments? Whichever one wants to go first.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Obviously being careful because I do work for the colonial government. Yeah, oh, that's a big question. I really look at, you know, when I was talking about, you know, the funding that was set forth for the guardianship programs, I guess what I'm saying is when we have this funding that's set out for programs that, you know, federal or provincial governments believe is going to be an answer to, you know, whatever we may have, you know, building better after climate chaos. What I'm not liking about that is I don't think it's a sustainable solution. It's still dictated by the colonial government. And it's just like looking at philanthropy and how philanthropy was always meant to be this, you know, I'm a privileged settler, or I'm a privileged person, I'm giving money to an organization to do their thing. But there's always this hidden agenda behind it. So that is a really tough question because there's so many different governance systems all across the board. And I really feel like if we're working in this colonial system, I don't know if there's building back better in the colonial system. I don't think there is. And, you know, I would love to hear what Pamela thinks about that. Like, I really feel like the reins need to be given back to Indigenous people to be the ones to decide how we're going to build back better, knowing that what we're doing now is going to impact us. You know, we talk about 7 generations. We can even look even past that. You know, time isn't linear, so we need to be looking even further. And yeah, I'd love to hear what Pamela thinks on that one as well.
Thank you. So I don't work for the government, but I think we do need to build relationships with our government leaders. I already talked about how we need more Indigenous people, Nitsitapi people in leadership, but we're not there yet. And so as we move towards that, we still need to have strong relationships with them. So the way I do it is I actually volunteer a lot. And so I worry about how many people know who I am, but then I think no, because then they're listening, just like you are all listening today, and they hear what I am saying. And I'm thinking about rebuilding. So what I heard in that question was like for a better world. So during the pandemic, that forced all of us to stop, slow down, stay home, and everybody listened and did that. And now things are opening again. The US-Canada border just opened. And so I hope we don't go back to the way we were. From the pandemic, one of the things that did come out of it is we had less common colds, less common flus, because we were staying home and not interacting so much and wearing masks when we go out. And my children are still in school and they still have to wear masks all day. And so that was a consequence of the pandemic, is we were sharing germs less, which is a good thing. And so when you talk about climate action, what I see is I want us to learn that it's a good thing that we don't have to drive our big trucks everywhere, that there's other ways, there's other solutions. I'd love to own a Prius or have a house that has solar panels. I would love all of that. And I would love people to be talking about that initiative. How do we get there moving forward? And learn about composting, do recycling, and do those things day to day that we can. And for when we're talking to leaders, because my boss talks to the local city council, you know, like we all have these connections, whether they're 1 step away or 2 people away, whatever it is. And so you have to keep telling them what is important to you. And what's important to our climate. We're seeing the devastating effects, and we talk about it, especially in this world, in this panel. We talk about the devastation that we're seeing when New York is flooded, and the families that are impacted, their families living in the basement. And so we hear it and we see it, And we need to keep talking about it in our circles so that people know that there's urgency there, that it's important to us. And we want the world to be better. We want to reduce our carbon emissions. We want to have safer neighborhoods. And what does that look like? And how do we get there? And how do we teach each other, right? Like we all talk about what our elders are telling us. And they're telling us for me, in Blackfoot. And so we have to learn how to listen and tell our children that, and tell the people around us, and help teach. Because I see a lot of comments about what is indigenization, what is colonialism, and I have those same conversations. And it's telling it from the perspective of what we as Indigenous people have learned from our ancestors, and how do we help teach that to the policymakers. I mean, it's a huge ask, but we're doing it every day. And so for me, the better world after the pandemic will be that I see more of that. I see more of those results.
Thank you so much. I do see one of our panelists already had to jump off. I know that Jesse has to jump off as well. This has been such a rich conversation, and some of the biggest takeaways that I'm hearing is that we have very different value sets in which we are approaching the climate crisis with. Even when we talk about language, building back better, someone wrote, sounds like colonialism shape-shifting. And it does. And it's because like colonialism, decolonization, all of these words, these are foreign words to our communities. So it's just as much of an unpacking for our communities as it is for white settler society. And I think the reality is we're all moving towards this. And when we break down decolonization, and what we're doing is deconstructing. We are literally deconstructing a current colonial system to make room for more that embodies the return of and connections to land. That is the roots. And this has been studied by Indigenous academics that have come to this sort of like multifaceted way of interpreting decolonization. And we have to understand that we have ideas and values and solutions that are outside of the colonial box that we have practiced since time immemorial. These speakers and experts today, they are experts. They are knowledge holders. They are people that are uplifting the voices of our communities, and through practice, enacting Indigenous climate solutions and advancing our voices in our communities' work. This is what it means to do work in our communities. This is what it means to eat the food, to grow the food, to harvest the food, to be on the land and support new generations. Decolonizing climate policy will require colonial governments to deconstruct what they currently have to make room for more. We are in a climate crisis. We cannot have a narrow scope of what our solutions look like. We need to broaden it to include everything, and we have to value everything at the same level. I want to thank the speakers so much for joining us here today. I wish we could have more conversations. There's some really rich questions in the Q&A, but this recording will be up on our YouTube channel that you can take a look at it later on, and you can check out the Decolonizing Climate Policy page on indigenousclimateaction.com for more information and ways to get involved. Thank you so much. I don't know, Rebecca, if you want to pop back on and say goodbye, but thank you everyone for joining me so much. Masi cho hai hai hawa. Thank you so much. I don't know if you'd like to say anything, Rebecca.
Just thank you so much. I'm so incredibly honored to be a part of this conversation in this group. So, agosane.